Everything you need to know about loot drops in Throne and Liberty simplified in this video. All loot drops in the game focuses on something called contribution. This is going to be the damage dealt to that monster or healing done in your party and outside of your party. This makes it so damage dealers and healers have more of an even chance of getting the items dropped based on their overall contribution to the fight. Now, to keep this simple, we're going to break this video into 3 parts. So you have the peace world boss fights, then you have the conflict world boss fights, and then you have everything else. We're going to start with the everything else first to get it out the way. So for the first section of the video, we're going to talk about open world abyss dungeons, quests, contracts, co-op dungeons, and dynamic events. If you don't know what dynamic events are, these are going to be the events that ask you to collect something and then turn it into an NPC. All the drops in all of these modes behave the exact same way. When monsters drop loot, it's based off who hit it first. Someone attacks something and you notice their health bar turns gray. That right there is signaling to you that you will not have a chance to get a drop should that monster die and drop something. However, if the player is in a group, everyone has an equal chance to get something that drops. The system works in 2 ways. So let's just say you're in a party full of 5 members. Something dies and it drops 5 pieces of loot. The game is set up to divide it all into 5 players, so each player will get 1 item. Let's use that same example and let's say it dropped 6 items. Well, 5 players should get 1 item, and then the last item is going to be randomly selected based off a random number generator. But you do have to keep in mind, if a party member is too far away from what died, they will not be able to be eligible to get an item. So you got to make sure you're in vicinity to get the item. That's a pretty normal thing for every game though. So now that we got that out the way, let's move on to the peace world bosses. So these are the PvE world bosses. You do not fight other players, you just fight the boss. Peace world bosses work a little differently. There's 2 ways to get items from a world boss in peace mode. The first way is contribution. Remember, contribution is damage dealt or healing healed whether you're in or out of a party. This means that if I'm in a party and my team is like the highest stacked players ever in that world boss fight, it does not matter. It's calculating your individual contribution. So now you might be asking, okay, I get it, but how does this contribution thing work with so many players? Well, first things first, you need to make sure that you reach a threshold to be eligible to even participate in the contribution type drop. Second, the amount of contribution that you put into the boss is going to be your chance for dropping an item. Let's say your contribution is 4% and my contribution is 10%. Well, I have a 10% chance to get that drop and you have a 4% chance to get that drop, even if we're in the same party. The second type of drop the world boss does is going to be a random drop. This means if you didn't receive a contribution reward, you're going to be eligible for just a random loot drop. So essentially in a peace world boss or a guild raid, you actually have 2 times the chance of getting the item. But you also have to keep in mind that you're not able to get 2 epic equipment items. If you win the contribution drop, you're not going to be eligible for the random drop and vice versa. You only get 1 drop. Now moving on to the third section of this video, the conflict world bosses. So these are the PvPvE bosses where you fight the boss and you fight other players around you. The loot system for conflict bosses has 2 stages. The first stage is deciding which guild gets the items. The second stage is deciding which players within the guild gets those items. Just like the other bosses, contribution is what matters in determining who's gonna get the items. But this time it works a little bit differently. Your individual contribution as a player does matter, but at the end of the fight, it's collectively getting all of your guild's contribution. This means a guild cannot rely on just one person to carry a conflict fight. At the end of the boss fight, everyone's contribution for each guild is going to be added up. There's one major thing to know about conflict bosses. If you die in a conflict boss fight, you're going to lose 70% of your overall contribution to the boss. You need to make sure you are not dying repeatedly. Now to sum everything up, the drop rate of bosses are based on contribution. The contribution that you give is going to be through damage dealt or healing healed. And at the end of the day, why is contribution important? Because contribution is going to be your percent drop chance to get an item. Although I explained it, I know it might still be a bit confusing. I'll link their specific post in the description below so you can go to their post. I tried to simplify everything because it was a bit descriptive, but I hope it helped you out. If you have any questions about anything, let me know in the comments down below. I'm always there to help you out. Until next time, you know what I always say. Think you guys are doing what? Poppin' often. Will often.